There's a kind of forgetting that doesn't feel like loss. It feels clean, like someone swept through before you arrived. Every item in its place. Every question already answered. Every mystery resolved before you even thought to ask. You were told who built the pyramids. 4th dynasty pharaohs. Armed with limitless slave labor and brilliant engineering. You saw the diagrams of ramps, the copper tools, the reconstructions of workers, pulling massive stones with ropes and determination. The story felt complete, satisfying, logical, so you nodded and moved on. But there's a problem with that story. Actually many. The Sphinx shows evidence of water erosion, from rains that haven't fallen since long before any pharaoh existed. The king who supposedly built the greatest monument in human history never left so much as a single word inside it. Millions of tons of stone were moved, yet there's no written record of what was being built. It's not just that some things don't add up. It's that everything seems designed not to. Like a second story was carefully laid atop an older one, and that original was buried just deep enough to stop you from ever thinking to dig. If you already feel like this mystery doesn't get discussed enough, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. Some questions have waited thousands of years to be asked. Because this isn't just about pyramids. It's about memory and what it takes to make an entire civilization forget something it once knew. In 1858, French archaeologist Auguste Mariette was clearing sand from the base of the Sphinx. Nothing revolutionary, just another day of routine excavation, cataloging scattered artifacts and architectural fragments. As part of his larger survey of the Giza Plateau, then his team uncovered a limestone slab, broken, weathered. Nothing spectacular, no gold, no carvings of gods or kings, just a flat stone covered in hieroglyphs. It looked ordinary until it was translated. That slab, now called the Inventory Stela, carried a message so clear, so formal, and so deeply uncomfortable, it quietly shook the foundations of Egyptology. According to that stone, Khufu, the pharaoh credited with the Great Pyramid, did not build the Sphinx. He found it, buried in sand, ancient, sacred. The inscription describes how Khufu restored the Sphinx, how he honored it, how he built temples beside it, not as creator, but as caretaker. The structure modern textbooks call Khufu's masterpiece was already ancient when he came to worship at its feet. And the stela doesn't open with royal boasting. It begins with an administrative record, a simple list, an inventory of shrines and temples Khufu ordered in reverence to a monument that already existed. The tone is humble, respectful, like a pharaoh kneeling before something far older than his dynasty. It mentions Isis as mistress of the pyramid and references a temple beside the Sphinx, now long lost beneath desert sands. But most striking is what the inscription doesn't say. There's no claim Khufu built the Sphinx. No explanation of its construction, no divine origin story, just restoration, just reverence. That's deeply unsettling for modern Egyptologists, because even Khufu's own priesthood, the people who crafted the mythology of divine kingship, believed the Sphinx was part of an older world, one that predated their gods and rulers, one Khufu couldn't claim. To grasp why this matters, you need to understand how ancient Egyptian kingship worked. Pharaohs didn't just rule, they defined reality. Their monuments weren't vanity projects. They were the architecture of cosmic order. Every temple bore its royal patron's name. Every statue aligned with sacred geometry. Every stone was proof of divine legitimacy. The pharaoh wasn't just king, he was God on earth. To discover a monument with no pharaoh's name, that wasn't just a mystery, it was impossible. So when the Sphinx, sitting dead center at the celestial crossroads of sunrise and equinox, aligned with uncanny precision, bears no signature, no claim, no myth of origin, you're left with a terrifying choice. Admit the timeline is wrong, or erase the question, and they chose the latter. The Inventory Stela was quietly tucked into the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, rarely displayed, never spotlighted, dismissed in academic circles as late-period fiction written by priests with murky motives. The official consensus: it was composed more than 1,000 years after Khufu. Religious forgery. created for political purposes. No one could quite explain, but everyone agreed weren't real. The dismissal was surgical, thorough, so effective that most textbooks don't even mention the stela, and the few that do treat it like a footnote, an oddity. But that creates its own paradox. If all later records are fake, unless they match earlier ones, we end up in a loop. Only what confirms the official story is valid. Nothing else is allowed through the gate. That's not research. That's censorship. And then there's the big question. Why would anyone invent a myth that minimizes a pharaoh? Egyptian priests were obsessed with inflating their ruler's greatness. Even centuries later, propaganda always glorified the king. It never humbled him. But this stela does the opposite. It turns Khufu from a god-builder into a reverent guest, a servant of forgotten deities, a caretaker of mysteries. If it was fake, it was the worst propaganda in history. Because it doesn't give answers, it raises bigger, scarier questions. Some try to say the stela wasn't even near the Sphinx but rather came from a nearby temple. But in ancient Egypt, nearby isn't casual. These structures were aligned by the stars. A few meters mattered. What's even more bizarre is that the same scholars who reject this stela routinely cite other late texts to support their preferred timeline. So no, it's not about the age of the tablet. It's about what it says. And the more you try to dismiss it, the louder it whispers. What if the oldest monument in Egypt was already ancient to the ancient Egyptians? Because if Khufu didn't build the Sphinx, and he only came to preserve it, then what does that mean for the pyramids that align perfectly beside it? Maybe they're older too. Maybe Egypt, as we know it, was built atop something older, a civilization buried not just in sand, but in silence. That's what we do with inconvenient truths. We hide them, label them legends, move on. But the Inventory Stela remains a stone that wasn't supposed to speak, still whispering truth. We like to think history is a straight line, a path from ignorance to brilliance. But the stela suggests otherwise. Not progress, rediscovery. A king arrives at a place older than memory. He doesn't proclaim dominance. He performs rituals, leaves offerings, says very little, because what he found wasn't broken. It was quiet. And that silence spoke more than any inscription he could add. The Sphinx would be buried again over and over by wind, by rulers, by forgetfulness. Each time, someone else would rediscover it, thinking they were first. But the stela proves otherwise. Even forgetting has a history. The way we lose knowledge isn't random, it's chosen. And what we choose to preserve says as much about us as the monuments do. So the real question sharpens. If Khufu didn't build the Sphinx, who did? And what were they guarding? Long before the pharaohs claimed Egypt as their own? The answer might lie not in what the Sphinx shows, but in who tried to bury it. Because if you study the erosion around its base, where water once carved deep channels into the stone, in a place that hasn't seen rain in thousands of years, you have to wonder, are we off by centuries? Or by civilizations? Some mysteries don't just challenge what we know, they challenge when we knew it. And sometimes the real question isn't who built it, but what were they protecting? Thutmose IV was never meant to be king. His older brothers were ahead in line. And in Egypt, where divine bloodline upheld cosmic order, his story should have ended there. But around 1400 BCE, something changed everything. Not war, not politics, a dream. By then, the Sphinx was vanishing again, buried in sand, only the head and upper chest still visible. No priesthood, no worship, no name, just silence. And during a hunting trip, Thutmose stopped to rest right between the lion's paws. What happened next defined his destiny. A voice spoke. It came from beneath the sand. The Sphinx called itself Hormaket, Horus of the horizon. It complained. It begged. Its throat was full of sand. Its watchers had abandoned it. It watched the sun rise alone, every morning, with no one to honor it. The offer was clear. Free me. Restore me. Remember me. And the throne is yours. Thutmose agreed. He summoned workers, cleared the sand, revealed the full body of the Sphinx, majestic and massive. He offered incense, gold, prayers, established a priesthood, and before long, means history never fully recorded, Thutmose IV became pharaoh. To scholars, this tale etched in red granite on the dream stela between the Sphinx's paws is just propaganda, an origin myth to justify a surprise coronation. But that explanation has a flaw. For the story to work, the Sphinx had to be forgotten. Thutmose didn't claim to honor a known symbol. He claimed to discover something long lost. That's the fracture in the timeline. If the Sphinx had only been built 800 years earlier by Khafre, how could it be so thoroughly forgotten? Egyptians remembered everything. Tombs were mapped, temples maintained, dynasties tracked over millennia. Yet the monument beside the greatest pyramid had no cult, no worship, no memory, until a forgotten prince heard it whisper. And what it whispered was pain, not just buried, but suffocating. The language on the dream stela is personal. It speaks of loneliness, of spiritual hunger. It's not myth, it's confession. And the way it describes the excavation, the type of sand, the wear on the stone, reads more like a real recovery than a fantasy. If this was fake, it was a strange one, because it didn't glorify Thutmose. It humbled him. He wasn't master, he was servant. And there's one last mystery. The top third of the stela, the section where the original builder may have been named, is broken off. Not worn, not weathered. Broken, cleanly, deliberately, like someone knew exactly what future generations couldn't be allowed to see. The rest of the stela is intact. It tells of a dream, a promise, an excavation, but not who built the Sphinx. Not when, not why. It's like someone designed it to be just believable enough, without disrupting the whole house of cards. Because if the Sphinx was forgotten by the 18th dynasty, then Egypt had already lost track of its greatest monument. Which means, maybe, just maybe, the greatest pharaohs weren't builders. They were heirs to something more ancient than history.